Hello YouTube, this is Stash the Forbidden Blogger coming back at you. Sorry, adjusting. Hope you can see me, hope you can hear me. Coming at you with my first pre-scheduled vlog with attempt at hype. The agency, I got my agency hat on tonight, CIA, the company, history of the agency. Specifically, I'm zooming in on in honor of the death of President George Bush the Senior, President Bush the One, former head of the agency himself, and Cold War, and the Reagan era. The most wild, probably the most wild part of the CIA history probably took place in the 80s, under the direction of Director of Central Intelligence Bill Casey, who was a OSS. That was the precursor. The pre-CIA is the OSS, the World War II OSS, which Director Colby and Director Casey was directly involved in World War II spy work. Now, so I'll give a brief overview to add to the drama of this. Okay, under the Carter administration, there was an event known as the Halloween Massacre. Okay, where President Jimmy Carter, a Baptist holy man, not exactly a holy roller, but a man of God, a Baptist, a Southern Baptist, I believe, good man, decided he wanted to try to clean up the agency, and him and Admiral Stanford Turner, who was then a director of the CIA, fired a huge crew of director of operations. That would be the dirty tricks department of the CIA. In other words, he fired a group of men whose job it was to overthrow elections and overthrow governments, and, you know, veteran black operatives, guys who had experience with illegal operations, maybe even assassinations. And he pissed them off. Now, Carter had some rough periods during the Cold War. One of his only sources was an agent out of Poland, a Kuklinski, that I made a video on. I'll put it in the notes. Richard Kuklinski, who gave over a lot of stuff from the Soviets. But also he began the program of funding the freedom fighters, the Mujahideen, in Afghanistan as well. But to make a long story short, Carter and Turner underestimated the aggressiveness of Ayatollah Khomeini of Iran, and he partook with his followers in Iran, the hardliners, I guess you might call them, and they took the embassy. They took the Marines. They took the embassy and in Tehran, and that began the downfall of Carter, along with the OPEC oil jam. There were car lines, gas shortages, and not to mention they took a picture of then President Carter failing to complete a marathon, and he looked like crap. So, as the story goes, allegedly the men that he had fired got together and they said, "Hey, Carter has got to go." And so they they got together, and I believe they, you know, however they do it, they decided that Reagan was the man, and not only that, former World War II spy veteran Casey would be the campaign director of the Reagan team. Meanwhile, the hostages, day by day, are imprisoned in Tehran. Pictures of guys with blindfolds. Now, an agency disguise expert by the name of, I believe, Mendez, they made that movie with Ben Affleck. He managed to get together a phony Hollywood movie crew, and they you know, exfiltrated. They freed a number of the hostages, but basically it was just an ordeal for the American people, and they were connecting it to President Carter, who had made a decent bid for peace between Sadat and I believe Mark and Mr. Reagan at the time of Israel. And he was trying to, you know, make peace and do stuff, but he had become jammed up in Iran. So also very conspiratorially and controversially, I would say that there has been rumors that there was a team of special operations people that that they were going to go in and make a hostage rescue attempt, and their aircraft went down. I believe it was a special forces guy named Colonel Beckworth. Tragically, their planes went down. There is conspiracy theories that there was some meddling with their operation. Nothing, of course, proven, but he was unsuccessful. And all the while, Reagan, an absolutely phenomenal speech man, and the voice of America via General Electric. Now it's tanking. Tanking was once the greatest company in the world, I believe. Huge, and he was their spokesman. Reagan became the greatest known voice in America, and he was more or less a creation of his Hollywood movie exec friends, and they spotted, there was an executive, I forget his name, he spotted him as a very, very good prospect to be president. He was on the wavelength also of Bill Casey. They hated commies and they hated the liberals, and they hated the Soviets. He was out to destroy the evil empire. Now, one of the most interesting things is both, I think, Casey and Reagan are kind of, by the then liberal media, were made out to be idiots, dolts. Casey himself was a balding older guy, big glasses. He mumbled. He allegedly food used to come out of his mouth and this and that. Couldn't hear him that well. And nevertheless, they set out to take out the Soviets, collapse the whole thing, go after them. And previously, the agency hadn't been doing that well against Russia. It was a closed society. Again, they had Kuklinski. They had originally had a victory with the Berlin airlift, and they saved the Berliners from starving. But after that, they dug a tunnel under Berlin. They were attempting to put in listening cables, and they were bagged. I think there was more than one leak, but the credit is given to an agent named Blake. There were also some wild things like defection by a guy, Howard, that they accused of being a drunk guy, and he escaped by using a rubber dummy. Jumped out of the car, and they followed him. He, I think in 2012, he was found dead in his apartment in, what do they call it? Your duchy, your summer home in Russia for whatever reason. But anyway, I'm digressing. There was also a lot of other setbacks. There was the entire Walker spy family. They gave up a lot. There was the Falcon and the Snowman. They gave up information. There was, unknown to the agency at the time, Aldrich Ames and Robert Hansen were giving up a lot. There was one year that so many of their agents in Russia got burned. It was called the Year of the Spy. So it wasn't all smooth sailing for the Casey Reagan team. And I think that was one of the reasons why Kuklinski himself wasn't burned. He trusted one man from the agency, and Zbigniew Brzezinski. So, like as I mentioned, Carter himself put the pressure on the Soviets in Afghanistan. It would become their Vietnam. Reagan, in case he would jack up the pressure 1,000%. Again, with their persona of being idiots, which is hilarious because they were anything but, really, in my estimation. They had a cadre of very experienced, aggressive people around them, where they were basically working directly together, Reagan and Casey, and they were cutting the rest of the government on it. They called it the deception team, or the deception squad, or the deception clique. So all these black operative guys who were fired by Carter, they were back with the Reagan team. Oh, I digress. I went forward. Again, Carter was stuck with the hostages, and I'm back to Carter. Sorry, Carter's still president. Sorry, forgive me for vlogging badly here. Okay, so let's go back to Carter. He's the hostage, the aircraft crash. The special operations guys weren't able to get the hostages out. There's a book by Gary Sic, who his actual name was a high up cabinet member with Carter. He wrote a very damning book talking about, okay, there was a Halloween massacre of which Carter fired the director of operations, black operative, badass guys, and he talks about how they took their revenge. Basically, everybody and a lot of people in the embassy. I mean, they were CIA guys working in the embassy. And he has a scene where the Ayatollah actually comes in and goes, "Can you get me some parts? Can you get me some parts to fix my weapons and trucks?" Because he was like, "I know you guys are. Can get the word back," or I think he let them communicate what he wanted, and they, according to their religious rules, they let women, they let some of the women, or the women, leave and so forth, but the rest of the guys, they were undercover as agency officials, allegedly. And so Sic talks about that, and he talks about the October surprise on Carter. Now, the Reagan team was behaving much like the CIA, much like some people say that Obama's CIA guys are still behaving against Trump. They want Trump out. They've been working on accusations of Russia collusion, but that's another topic. Whether real or imagined, I will address that another time, like you care, right? This is good for ASMR. Okay, so that's what it was. The Gary Sic maintains that Bill Casey's guys went to work on on Carter. They worried that Carter would pull an October surprise. He would negotiate and free the hostages in time to get in and give them a good run in the election. So allegedly, they made agreements with the Iranian revolutionaries who had seized the embassy to hold on to to the crew of hostages just a little longer. So that pressure, Carter wasn't able to get them out. He wasn't able to win the presidency. Reagan was a good on camera. He did well. He did well in the debates with Carter. If Carter had been successful, he might have had a good chance to win. But without freeing the hostages, no chance. The way it's described is, it's as if miraculously the new president was going to be a hard ass, and that's it. You're going to free the hostages. So the story goes up behind the scenes, and even now that we're talking about, God rest his soul, the late President Bush, he was in on some of the negotiations. There was this idea that he was seen in Paris or something. That there were money transfers at the critic Swiss to back and forth. This would eventually build up to what would be called the Iran-Contra affair, because a back-channel relationship had been established between the Reagan, Casey, Bush hardliners. So it doesn't happen for Carter. The October surprise. Allegedly, the Casey campaign team, which would become the CIA again, delayed the action of freeing the hostages, and thus Reagan waltzed into office, and he was big from the beginning. From the beginning, the message went out that it was an evil empire, and the Reagan guys went at it. They gave the Russians everything they had. They used the maximum amount of deception, and one of the deceiving things was that Reagan was adult and Casey was adult. They were anything but. They were absolutely hard ass. He was good for the morale. They were going to swamp the Soviets, build a huge navy, 500 ships. The Russians thought it was going to be 500 ships. They built 600 ships. They also engaged in programs to way inflate the U.S. power. And not only that, he developed Star Wars, which the Russians probably didn't know whether to be scared shit of it, and it was a joke, or it was a real deal. But they did it, and they built listening towers. They went crazy. The power of the NSA and CIA quadrupled, 1,000-fold. The satellites and everything were picking up everything. They built, I think it was Devil's Hill or something, the legendary Stasi that I had vlogged with before. They built towers. They sucked up everything they were saying. Improvements in the satellites. You could see a pumpkin seed from outer space, or read a guy's license plate. There was virtually no communications that they weren't sucking up. Okay, and the Navy was huge. They began a huge arms race. They engaged in secret operations with the Saudis to squeeze the Russians for oil prices. They, as I mentioned in the previous vlog, talk about the guy Gus Weiss, who I thought maybe hardliners had possibly assassinated in his Watergate apartment. He was part of the genius team that which I really think probably also had a lot to do with unsung heroes in the counterintelligence forces of the U.S. For certain reasons, I think so. I won't get into why I think so 100%, but I think so. In other words, I'm a big fan of Gus Weiss. I think he was one of the prime movers, but there was other great guys. They engaged in high-tech sabotage operations, as chronicled in a book by Thomas Reed, At the Abyss. They did not, the Soviets were in trouble with that chipping process, that sophisticated sabotage. They didn't know what sure their equipment worked or not. They also had to deal with the aggression of the massive, in particularly the Navy, but all branches, but in particular the Navy, engaged in aggressive operations. The admiral name, his name escapes me, but they loaded destroyers with false that would send out false equipment that they were really carriers, so it would be another carrier group. They broke codes. The Russians have done flybys on us recently, but we did that then with the beautiful Tomcats, Not to mention the Hollywood machine would be pumping out, extremely sophisticated propaganda, not to mention Top Gun, making the Americans appear to be extremely formidable. The days of the Vietnam specter were behind us with the hope that Reagan engaged in, to the point where he decimated and removed Maurice Bishop of Grenada, which, Club Med and Hedonism too were canceled because Reagan took his 600-ship Navy and he attacked Grenada. So he wasn't fooling around. There was no end to how aggressive they were. They funded to the teeth the Contras in Nicaragua, or as Casey would say, Nicawawa. Nicawawa. And pressure. They had the Pope in Poland. How many divisions does the Pope have? Well, guys in the KGB had arguments over that because the Polish, very Catholic Pope unleashed whatever power he had within the Catholic Church onto the Russians. At one point, they had gone too far and killed the Polish priest in Gdańsk, and the Russians and the KGB looked bad. That was huge. The earlier on in the history, the agency had been humiliated when they found their tunnel under Berlin. Under Reagan, they got everything. The Russians didn't think they could get to these undersea cables. They got in there. They had lost a submarine. The Russians thought it was impossible. They couldn't get down. This thing had gone deep. The Americans figured out a way to get down there. Again, with the Hollywood thing, and then it was, Star Wars, and that feeling that, there was an invulnerability building with Reagan. He got on the radio and he was like, the bombing will commence. I've outlawed legislation that has outlawed the Soviet Union. The bombing will commence in 5 minutes. Oh, is this on? Intimidation. Any other agency that wouldn't pick up the slack. Casey himself was a warrior. He was using the CIA proactively. The Russians had been making inroads, or the communists, I should say, had been making inroads in Latin America, South America, Africa. Casey's CIA put countermeasures, propped up anti-Soviet governments everywhere to the extreme, and they were raging the arms race of an all-out economic sense of warfare. They had been ahead in this technology, software, and chip making, and again, the Casey and Reagan had got lucky. Francois Mitterrand handed them over, a major defector of the group within KGB that was in charge of seizing sophisticated technology, chips, what have you, and Casey and Reagan knew what to do with that, and in particular Casey, he instead of just busting all the guys, and Director T, that's the name of it, Director T, specifically Director T Line X. Their defector man Vladimir Vetrov, who went to DST in France, gave up everything. So instead of rounding up all the KGB guys in Europe and the States, many of them in Great Britain and the United States, they sold them defective technology, but it wasn't just defective, it was in such a way that they couldn't detect it. And the most famous thing was that there was allegedly the largest non-nuclear explosion somewhere in Siberia, and this pipeline up there was to get the Soviets back in the game. And they blew it up and made it look like an accident. That's why I was vlogging previously about that guy Gus Weiss, because he allegedly was one of the brains behind that idea, and it was a big coup for the CIA, because they had been taking huge blows during the Cold War, both the British and the Americans. In particular, the British had been burned badly by the so-called Cambridge Five, Philby, and also the agency coming off with a loss in Vietnam. The morale was pretty low. The Diem brothers, did they order an assassination with it? The extreme Kennedy got us out of it with great skill, but there was also the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was tense. That had brought conflict between the Oval Office and the agency. Allegedly, some say it had something to do with the assassination of Kennedy, friction between him and the agency. I don't know. Or was it the mob? Whatnot? That's this topic for another time. But it was seen as not exactly a victory. It was a kind of, but that was too tense. It still had the feeling of Soviet power. Reagan had done everything to erase that, and when his Mr. Gorbachev tear that wall down was in a sense a part two to Kennedy's Ich bin ein Berliner. And the intelligentsia class in the U.S. Didn't like Reagan, and they didn't like Casey. And in my opinion, both men took them for a ride, playing dumb. As a matter of fact, the late Phil Hartman had a Saturday Night Live bit where he played Reagan, if you recall. He would act like an idiot when the Girl Scouts came in to ask for an autograph and sell them Girl Scout cookies or something to that effect. He'd be like, "Well, hello." And then the door would shut, he'd be speaking Farsi or something on the phone, like, do this and that. I think that there's a movie called Farewell, where that was the code name of Vetrov, where Fred Ward, I'm afraid I vlogged about this another time, but Fred Ward played an intelligent Reagan, which was funny. much like the Bush team, God rest his soul, with his funeral today, made short work of the Dukakis crew with the Willie Horton and the Dukakis with the tank helmet. The Reagan team and Reagan himself was able to make any detractor in the government, in the Senate, the Congress, to a certain extent, the press. Anyone who went after Reagan, all of a sudden you would look like a weak commie. He had that ability. He would get on. He had the father figure thing. Brilliant speaker. The Teflon president, they'd call him, as finally the back channels that they had used would the only thing that would come to haunt him and hurt his almost in a certain way impeccable record was the so-called Iran-Contra affair. Trading arms for hostages. Reagan also was dealt a blow in Lebanon with the truck bombing of 241 Marines. God bless those guys' souls. But he chose not to engage in there. In their giant super navy, it was like they remodified the incredibly huge battleship New Jersey. I believe it was a battleship New Jersey. Yeah, with those huge World War II guns, and they used it, and they shelled the crap out of Lebanon, and he got out of there. He did not become embroiled in it. But the Middle East was always a labyrinth of pain for any U.S. president. He got embroiled in Iran-Contra. And the reason why I say that is because it was humorous, because longtime super correspondent Woodward and Bernstein, who had basically taken down Nixon, was not, I don't think he was a rabid enemy of Reagan, and I'm not even going to say he's a liberal and this and that, but he would have loved to have scooped Bill Casey. And when you read accounts of him in the New York Times and his book in the 80s, Veil, which is an interesting read, to say the least, there's a funny scene where it's as if Casey would never talk about the Iran to the point where he got like a brain tumor, and he's like, "I'll show you," and he pretty much, died rather than talk. But that showed the aggression. They put Oliver North on it, and they were not to be denied. Nobody would get in the way of the machine. Known as the Cowboys. At the same time, paradoxically, there's been a relatively recent book, I believe it's called The Dead Hand, which showed a lot of, and there's been some other books and memoirs on Reagan that actually, contrary to the public figure, behind the scenes, he was actually a lot more worried about nuclear war than people know, and his communications with the Soviets, actually, despite his aggression against them, was pretty good. I mean, 1,000 times better than it's been under the Obama administration, and now consequently, because he's been stuck with this alleged Russia meddling thing, Russia, Trump, who, at least in as campaigning, expressed an interest of good relations with the Russians. It hasn't worked out that way for him, and that's going to be my next vlog, is the seriousness of the problem of Russia-American relations currently, which this sloppy vlog I'm doing, and basically building up, I'm giving you an idea of the pressure that had been put on Russia under Reagan and Bush. Bush would continue in that vein. Himself no stranger to intelligence, he had been the director, and a popular one. And he had a lot of government experience, and the directorship of the CIA went well. As opposed to under Colby, where he agreed to talk to the Church Committee, and he had done kind of an internal battle with Angleton, who was a counterintelligence chief, who was convinced, and I guess in some ways he was right, that there were moles in the agency. But he shut the thing down cold, going after them. Colby would eventually get rid of Angleton and loosen up the agency. Angleton, a shadowy figure, actually showed up at the room of a woman who had been killed. Mayer, Miss Cord Mayer, was a longtime CIA guy. His beautiful wife, alleged mistress of JFK, had been found dead. allegedly experimented with LSD with JFK, allegedly. And Angleton showed up there, whatnot. Now I'm really going down, that's deep agency history. But how did I get off into that? Oh yeah, the troubled agency. Colby was into all that, and then he would get released by Ford, and I think at a certain point Bush, who died, whose funeral was today, took over. Bush Sr. was equally aggressive as Reagan. He continued the pressure. William Casey, always aggressive. He wanted to take his longtime Wall Street friend Max Hugel, but he would call him like Hugel. I want Hugel. They had made a lot of money together in Wall Street. He and helped him out. He wanted to take his friend in there. They were appalled. I guess he was the kind of guy who would wear like a leather jumpsuit. There was an episode where his toupee blew away and they had to pick it up, whatever. They were a pair. He didn't last all that long with Casey, but Casey lasted the deal until he passed on. Not a lot of people, really, American people, completely know what these guys put into that. They did battle with the Russians, and they won. In a very bizarre way, they led today. There's a huge debate now. Is Putin good for Russia? You know, the media certainly says he's evil. They say he's a KGB man. As far as I know, he's extremely popular in Russia, and he's making an attempt to bring them back to Christianity via their religion, which is the Russian Orthodoxy. You could say that the good old boy network, the CIA black operatives, freed up Russia. What can I say? And they began to with Reagan's strength, either real or illusionary, they began to shake the ghost of the loss, the tragic loss. In my opinion, didn't need to happen. I think they could have easily won Vietnam, but that's another story. They did a lot to put that behind them. But the interest in the CIA by the American people is different now. I don't think it was in the public's mind, or particularly it was a dreaded enemy of the left during the time of Reagan Casey. Now it seems that Brennan, a left-wing CIA man, is beloved by the left. And Clapper, another intelligence man, beloved by the left. They haven't really shown any evidence, but they insist that Trump won the election by fixing it with Russia. I'd recommend the vlogger A.H. Goodman about monitoring this, and I'm gonna go into it myself. I'm gonna take my take on it coming up soon. I mean, again, it's incredibly complex, and probably I know that the Russian people admire, for instance, George Bush, because they lost a lot of people in the war, and he got shot down. He participated physically. So hats off to the president today. Today is funeral, December 5th in Washington, with Trump in attendance. His son giving a mint to Michelle Obama. I missed that aspect of the wacky White House. It's different now, although the left would say Trump is. Trump I think, modeled his campaign and his success on Reagan, as did Bill Clinton, who studied his speeches very carefully. So, again, I digress and go off topic. If this is any good, give me a freaking thumbs up. I'm going to be doing part 2 of the wild history of the agency soon. I hope you enjoyed this. My next vlog is going to be, if any of them are worth anything, I think they're going to be my most important one, because I'm going to add to this one and give my case for why the U.S. needs to engage, like different people have said. One is Professor Stephen Cohen, expert in Sovietology and Russia, that is worried about the very poor relationship currently with Russia. I'm going to give a strong case for what I believe is a mistake to go. You can go after Trump for whatever, but going after him for making peace with Russia in some measure, to this degree, where they don't even want him to really talk to Putin, is dangerous to be doing with a nuclear armed Russia. But I'm also going to go into the humorous yet horrible coups by the agency, starting in '49 with Syria, Albania. I got a list here. Syria again, Indonesia, Cambodia, a coup in the Congo, attempted one in the Bay of Pigs, they lost. What about Operation Mongoose? That's in the JFK movie. The Dominican Republic, South Vietnam. In '64, they tried twice in Brazil. Guyana, Bolivia, Chile, Angola. Oh, and the Contras, Nicaragua, my favorite, right? Chad. They tried. I guess that wasn't a good deal about the president. Bush, I think he said for the Kurds to go at Saddam. He kind of screwed them in that. They went at it in Haiti and elsewhere, and specifically, though, the one I'm going to go into is the Syria one, which goes into my paranoid blog coming up, my extra paranoid blog about why it's not a good idea to be going at it this deeply with Russia. I hope I'm improving at this vlogging. I hope you found this useful. Again, you can turn this on, and this could be an ultimate sleep aid. Give me some comments below. I didn't really do this in a linear fashion. It was kind of cyclical, and I went back into older history, and I got them a little bit mixed up. But as you can see, my main point was Reagan and Casey were geniuses. They left Michael Dukakis in the dust. They took Gorbachev for a ride. They sabotaged his military, ruined his economy, built a gigantic 600-ship navy, turned the United States into the greatest superpower that humankind has ever known. And we'll tear that wall down. Yes. We miss you, Mr. Reagan. We miss you, Mr. Bush. At least part of you guys. Some of the most controversial men in history that need to be studied and restudied. Alright. This is my first pre-planned vlog. I hope you like this. It wasn't as funny as I thought. My William Casey imitation, my Reagan imitation needs a lot of work. Alright, God bless you guys. Talk to you later.